Troy, Tondi, William Nababan. Welcome
Leon,
to another episode of the Gear Podcast.
thank you very much for having me, Leon. Thanks for letting me be a part of your podcast.
Well, it's your podcast as well, mate. So
I'm just kidding, mate. It's good to be here. How you doing, mate?
yeah, pretty good. Had a decent enough weekend. What about yourself, mate? You played a few gigs, had some fun times.
Had a couple of gigs, double banger on Friday, which was nice. I don't do that many double bangers anymore. And then, I think I just had a bit of family time. That was pretty cool.
It's kind of nice.
What about you?
I've got a double banger myself coming up this Friday.
Do you? What is it?
Regular Akui at the Hen, and then we're up near me at the Cornerstone. So
The Cornerstone.
plenty of times now.
I haven't played up there for ages.
Oh, nothing's changed.
Yep.
But a gig's a gig, mate.
Oh, it's a close one
We
too.
like to. Yeah, it's close for me. It's awesome. The staff are actually awesome as well, and we play quite loud in there. So
What time is that? 8 o'clock?
yeah, it's like an 8:30 kind of thing. So
Yep.
you have, a solid 40 minutes to get from one gig to the other.
It's
For anyone
basically
who's
the
familiar
drive.
with Perth, it's basically a 40-minute drive. So yeah, it's. I mean, we do our due diligence and set up the other gig earlier in the day, which it's kind of nice to just come in. And do you find sometimes when you're setting up for a gig, especially in a pub, and there's people everywhere and there's a lot of noise and there's like music on the PA, it's too loud to think sometimes.
Yep.
And you have to
absolutely.
think because you're like, okay, I need to find where to plug this thing in. And I find the excess noise really stifles my creative workflow.
Do you know what has helped me so much with that? Noise cancelling earbuds, like my Apple AirPods in noise cancelling.
go.
I walk into the gig with them turned. Not always, but if I've been listening to a podcast or something, I'll just have them in as I'm walking into the gig, and it's just bliss. Like some of the really loud, just like you're saying, like the ambient noisy gigs, so easy.
Yeah, and I often wonder with those kind of things, you go in and you play and you make more noise. Imagine being staff there where you're having to take people's orders and, you're working at the bar and there's just a band blasting through Summer of 69 as loud as possible. They're phoning it in. You're phoning it in. How is this good?
Yep. It's not the one, Uncle Leon, but that's okay. Well, I'm glad you set up beforehand. That's nice. And then you'd go do the Hen. That's a fun gig. When are we playing there? We're playing there in a couple of weeks, eh?
Couple of weeks, the last Friday, so not
31st?
this Friday. 31st it'll be, yeah.
So if
that'll be a
anyone's in
fun one.
Perth, 4 till 7, come down to the Hen, our Henley Brook, and see.
Bit of an impromptu King's X tribute gig.
We could probably play at least one King's X song. We'll play some Striper songs.
Yeah. Anything you want to hear, we'll give it a red hot go.
Yep.
But that also brings me to something which I thought was pretty interesting. We talked about Striper last week.
Yep.
And I watched Michael Sweet, and I can't remember if I mentioned it, but he played one guitar for the whole gig, and Ozfox,
Yeah, they both
there were no
did, hey?
guitar. There were no guitar changes.
I noticed that too.
I'm down with this. This is how I like to do a gig.
Yep.
Often there's that kind of. Sometimes it's a bit excessive as well. You go and see a live band, and I get it if bands have different tunings or they play particularly hard, so you're knocking stuff out of tune, but I often chuckle to myself sometimes when you go and see a band and, it's like a local band, but the guy has 4 different guitars and he's constantly swapping and changing. And,
Yep.
I often just think, mate, no one cares that much. What are you doing? Because I certainly don't. I'm normally, I'll bring a backup if I can, but sometimes, if it's a fly gig or something like that, it's just not feasible to even do that.
Yeah, I'm the same. I might bring a backup. For acoustic gigs, never, ever. Never, ever do I ever take one because, my whole thing is how few trips can I make to the car and back to do this gig? And if it's more than one, then I'm just not having a good time. So yeah, it's I don't want to get a double guitar case as well for certainly for acoustic guitars. For electric guitars,
you did
I've got
get
one.
that double guitar bag and promptly gave it to me.
I
which
did do that,
used
didn't I?
Years and years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That
right.
thing's it's fallen apart at the moment. I haven't used it much, but it's a very handy thing.
Well, I also have one. I should say I did. My dream was to have a good double guitar bag, but the mono case ones are really expensive. And
Yeah.
and I think yours is a Gator one, and I also ended up buying a double guitar case not too long ago, But yeah, it fell apart really easily.
Well,
Unfortunately,
when you've got double the guitar in there, you wear
Twice
it
the
twice
rock.
as fast.
Yeah.
Twice the rock, exactly. There was one thing I've been doing actually is I have that Harley Benton Dullahan, the headless,
Oh,
and
yeah.
because it's so small, it's really easy to just stick it in the car. So that's kind of become my backup for local stuff. And it's guitar sounds really, really good. It's easy to play, but I feel like if I was in a position, at what level do you go from doing that where to having a rack with 9 guitars in it? You
Yeah.
see Mark Tremonti's Rig Rundown.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of nice PRS guitars in there.
Can I just say as well, I think like you leaving a guitar in the car as a backup, that's the sort of thing I would do as well, where it's like, I feel like professionals would hear that and go like, what's the point of like bringing a backup guitar if you're not going to take it out and tune it? But I'm like, mate, if you're doing 3 sets, just take a break, walk 5 minutes to your car and get the guitar out. As long as you've got a, you're not worried about loot getting stolen or something, you can hide it in the boot or something. Yeah, that's exactly what I would do. It's why I have like a case of cables ready to go. I'm not going to bring it all into the gig and take that extra trip. It's too much work. It's
why
just
I always used to keep a spare pair of socks and undies in the car.
Yep.
You just never know, mate.
Did you ever keep toilet paper in the car?
Yep.
Yeah, I never did that, but I know there's been times when it's been close.
I think looking back, it's kind of when I had that old station wagon, in my early 20s, I basically lived in that thing.
Yeah.
Where, I always had a spare set of clothes in there and a spare set of just utility stuff. There was I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have bought a Shure microphone at some case, and you get the little pencil case with it.
Yep.
But I always use that for my guitar accessories. Bit of polish, bit of a screwdriver, bit of a what else? Some clippers, just the things you might need in a pinch. And keeping one of those in the car at all times was another thing that I would do as well.
And let's just say for a second, for those of you that don't know Leon as well as I know Leon, he says when I had my station wagon in my early 20s, as if he didn't just get rid of that station wagon a matter of months ago. So
as
how long?
I didn't have that station wagon for 14 years or something
exactly,
like that.
14 years. It was a very sad day to see that go.
It was, for what happened was we were actually down south for the Margaret River Guitar Festival and got up in the morning, went to get some coffee, and I'd parallel parked, and I refused to admit that I was in the wrong, as anybody in this kind of thing. But as I opened my door, someone hit it and like ripped it off the hinges. So that became a nice, expensive little trip. But I was like less concerned about my safety and more concerned that I think I had about 485,000 kilometers on the clock. I really wanted to get it to 500,000.
Yep.
And didn't. But having said that, someone locally bought the car off me, basically, and they were like, they're handy with cars. They were going to fix it up, and I have since seen that they fix it up well enough they drive their dogs down to the beach.
Great.
So the car's still going.
It's
it's still trucking away.
The amount of stuff that we
Road
put,
Warrior.
man, the amount of stuff we fit in that car is insane. Like, I take a lot of pride in how well I can pack a bunch of stuff into any sort of vehicle. But what we did with that car, like to get drum kit, bass rig, guitar rig, full PA, and 3 people, and sometimes luggage as well, to go play 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours away in the country. Like, it was an impressive feat, and that was happening like weekly.
Yeah, for a while. I mean, it just became the band car.
Yep.
It just went and went and went, and it's still going. Those dogs that are getting driven to the beach, they're appreciating it.
Yep.
But that brings us to the topic of today's discussion, Troy.
Man, I'm trying to derail this thing. What are you?
I'm always looking for a segue, and well, in this case,
can't fit much gear on a Segway, mate.
Can't fit much gear on a Segway, but you can ride around Rottnest Island on one. Apparently, it's a good time. How many guitars and amps do you really need? I saw this posted on a forum recently. I saw a video during the week. Friend of the channel, John Cordy, put up a video about like how many amps do you really need, and I always enjoyed John's take on stuff. So I figured it might be a nice way to just talk about some stuff. I'm going to contextualize this and say, how many guitars and amps do you need for you? You run a studio and you do gigs regularly.
Yep.
How many guitars and amps do I need? Where I guess I kind of have, it's a glorified home studio, but I do demo stuff for YouTube a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I just like stuff as well. And how many guitars and amps does somebody who just wants to have a good time playing guitar at home in a pro or semi-pro capacity, just purely a hobbyist, how many guitars and amps do you need?
Are you asking me the question right now?
I'm asking you the question right now.
Mate, there's only one answer. Just one more.
Just one more. And thank you and good night.
No, I mean, the thing is, need and want are two very different things. So let's just
need and want is a bit of a spectrum as well.
Yeah, you know? I think we should address this question in a actual serious way, and I think I want to do that. But in terms of like my hobby is guitar, right? So the honest answer is like, how many guitars do I need? It's however many I fucking feel like owning, provided it's not actually sending me broke, which is a possibility. You know, like right now, I can't afford to go buy a new guitar. I can't afford to go buy a new amp because I've got 2 children and a mortgage and bills and all these sort of things. So it would be highly irresponsible for me to go and just drop all that on a brand new guitar, brand new amp.
Well, let's face it, you can, but you know,
as I said,
irresponsible. Those little miracles need to be fed.
Exactly. But if you can afford it, if you feel like it, if that's the thing that brings you joy, then I think it really is however much you feel like it.
It's better than spending your money on crack.
Yeah,
that would be one. that would be one way to ruin your family life. You know, guitar is a few degrees lower than that sort of thing. So I guess from that perspective, guitar is also my main hobby as well. So, you know, having a bunch of different guitars is a nice thing because
it's a
variety
luxury.
is a spice of life. It's an incredible luxury.
You know, we were both lucky to have, be fathered into this hobby actually in a way, like directly from our dads having a bit of gear.
Yeah.
So that kicks off the, you know, in terms of you never needed to spend a cent on equipment if you think about it. Like in terms of a needs purpose, like for you and I both do our jobs, which if, you know, take the gig we're going to do together in a couple of weeks' time, don't need any gear for that, apart from the PA, but that's not on the agenda.
Even then, the venue has a PA that you can use.
Exactly. So really, you just need the one to go do the job. However, you know, I don't really drink and I don't do drugs, and I'm not really into sports and things. Sort of like the thing that I enjoy spending my money on. I don't really go on holidays and stuff too often. The thing that when I have disposable income to spend the money on is guitar related, and that's a hobby for me. So
we've established outside of the hobby that you do need an acoustic guitar.
Yeah. To
do what you do. So this is I'm actually writing these down right now. So there's an acoustic guitar, and you could argue that it needs some kind of undersaddle pickup.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be quite playable and quite comfortable.
Yep.
So you can't just you can't do the $99 nylon string thing. You've got to drop probably at least $1,000 on it.
Look, to be honest, debatable.
Let's say around...
But yeah, go on. But in saying that, I've played some cheaper guitars with pickups in them that they don't sound as good. But if you want to talk about in a pragmatic sense, what do I need to go and do a gig? Like, I've gigged with people that have pulled out like $400 guitars with a pickup in it, and they've got through a 3-hour cover gig. Do you know what I mean? And it's been fine. It hasn't been good, but it's been fine.
So in that professional capacity, I guess it means how many gigs are you willing to play to pay for the instrument?
Exactly.
How long does it take for it to pay for itself? And like, I mean, a month of, say, 4 gigs?
Yeah. If $1,000, 4 gigs, yeah, easy. It's one a week.
4 to 5 gigs?
Sure.
There you go. That's pretty reasonable from a stuff you need capacity.
Yeah. But that's doing the gigs that we do. You know, not everyone's going to go out and do an acoustic gig, and that's completely fine. So for me, yeah, like I need a decent gigging acoustic, which if it is a good recording acoustic as well, that's awesome. But again, separating need from want and what would be nice, there's probably 3 categories. Yeah, you probably get away with just having the one. So
there you go. We've established that you do need a guitar to enjoy playing guitar.
So it's more than 0.
More than 0, not back to 0.
No.
By the way, if you want to support the music that gets made by some of the idiots on this channel, ragdollrock.bandcamp.com.
Yep.
We'll come back to that little segue a little bit later. So, okay, what about electric guitars? Because, you know, for us, most of the time you're playing guitar, it's an electric guitar. Most of the people listening to this going to be enjoying the electric guitar.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is going to spiral very, very quickly.
Yep.
you need a guitar. You need at least one. If you could only have one of your guitars, which one do you reckon what would be the first one you grab if your house was on fire?
Well, that's a different question because that's sentimentality. So in terms of to do the job, in terms of like sentimentality, it would be my Guild Acoustic probably, because that was my old man's guitar. But I have okay, quickly, how many guitars do you have off the top of your head? Do you know? Have you counted them?
It's more than 40.
Yeah, I've got about 33, I think, from last count. So there's a lot of instruments there. In terms of cost, my Sir is the most expensive guitar that I own. So maybe you take that. In terms of like being able to do all of the gigs that I need to do, either my Strat or one of my Tellys is probably the honest answer, or maybe my Les Paul.
So this is interesting. Would you say that everyone needs a Fender style guitar and a Strat style guitar as part of the toolkit to experience the rainbow of flavors that are electric guitar? Because I find playing a Strat, I play totally differently. I dial in different sounds. Mm-hmm. It puts me it's like very much there's a particular space that it puts me in. I really like that space.
Yep.
It's a different space to like a Les Paul style thing. And, I'll include a PRS single cut or an ESP Eclipse or anything Les Paul-ish.
Yes. Yep.
Doesn't have to say the big G on the top. You would almost say immediately, hey, you got to have something. I feel like everybody should own a Strat.
If you want to cover the bases of what it means, like, yeah, as you say, the taste of the rainbow of guitar, I think Strat is important. But by the same token, your main flavors are Strat, Telly, Les Paul, right? You can't really deny that covers about 60% of the spectrum of guitar, 70% of the spectrum of guitar.
I would agree, and I would say, actually saying, and a lot of people go, oh, well, Strat or a Telly. It's like, no, Telecaster, it's a thing. You got to have that ashtray bridge. You got to have the Telly bridge pickup and the Telly neck pickup.
Yep.
That's such a thing. To me, that's, I don't know why I just think of like Tom Petty songs when I think of the sound of a Telecaster. Probably not what everybody else thinks of, but that kind of chimey, jangly thing.
Sure.
And they can be very aggressive. You can play jazz on a Telecaster. Like, that's a very accepted thing.
You can do anything on a Telecaster. You can do anything on any of those three guitars. That's why they're so cool. I mean, what it sort of boils down to me is, do you want single coils or do you want humbuckers? Because that's like, you want the chunk of a humbucker or you want the chime of a single coil. So that's your two flavors. I tried to get that with some of the HSS guitars that I have, but it's sort of like, it's not quite the same. Like my Charvel, which I really like playing, it's kind of stratty because it's got singles in it, but it doesn't have the same feel as when I play my Strat or some other really nice Strats I have. And, the humbucker and the bridge is a very different experience than playing a Les Paul or something. But, the Les Paul, you want to do rock rhythm sounds, nothing's going to beat that.
And this is, we're just kind of purely looking at this from somebody who plays guitar perspective. I feel like what we've just discussed, if you're recording or you're running a studio, you have to have these kind of things happening, right?
It certainly
you definitely
helps.
Definitely need the ability to just be tracking something and go, hey, you know what? Try it on this instead, and hand them like a Strat or hand them a Telly, hand them a Gibson style thing.
What it comes down to me is there's like, I don't have a number, but there's a certain like finite number of accepted tones and standard tones, and they're really boring and boring in the sense they're not creative to try and find. They just are accepted in like the contemporary music that you've listened to for the last 60 years. And so to have access to that easily is important. And that's why you gravitate, because like so much of the music you know and love has been done with, say, those three guitars over the last, I said, 60 something years of contemporary music, from pop music or whatever, rock music. So yeah, everything else that exists outside of that is cool and different, but it doesn't, like, if you're just needing a rhythm guitar part in a rock song, it's like, and it's not even that important. It's like, well, I'll just get my Les Paul and I'll use that guitar for it. You know,
I'll just do it.
Yeah, it's the standard boring vanilla tones of rock music is what
it's a bit of a like almost the way we've approached this question is what is the utilitarian guitar toolkit?
Yeah.
I do feel like you need something fruity in there as well. Like, you know, just something weird, whether that's like an offset style guitar, like a Jazzmaster, whether it's a Gretsch, whether it's something with P90s, like a Les Paul Jr. I would say that minimal toolkit, whether it's a Floyd Rose equipped guitar, you know, like an Ibanez or a Jackson or something like that. I'm writing this down. I'm going to call it the fruity choice. There's something that's a little bit different. Because if you think about these things as well, like you got a Strat, you got a tremolo. So to me, that's kind of like, that's 5 guitars. That feels like, you know, I teach some people who, you know, they own 4 or 5 guitars, and it's pretty similar to this. You know, they have their like sentimental thing, which might be, you know, it was the first guitar they bought, or it might be, you know, they love Jazzmasters, so they've got a Jazzmaster that they've pimped out. But then they'll have like a Strat soul thing. You know, it might be a knockoff, or it might be something like a Silver Sky. They'll have their like humbucker equipped Les Paul thing. It might be, you know, an Epiphone, or it might be a Gibson. It might be a PRS. It might be something like a Duesenberg, you know, something just that little bit kind of different, but short scale. It's almost like short scale humbucker, long scale single coil, acoustic, and then some hybrid between all of that. So that feels like a pretty kind of minimal thing. What about amps? Because I feel like I mean, when I started recording, it was kind of like, you just record with a Marshall and that's all you need.
I think amps, it gets distilled down to something very simple, like a Strymon Iridium, where that covers the basis of again, vanilla stock tones. So you've got your Fender, you've got your Vox, you've got your Marshall. Like that covers your heavier sort of sounds with the distortion, your chimier cleans with the slightly broken up or slightly more broken up with the Vox and the Fender, depending on what it is that you like. You know, it's all good. It's just what's appropriate, what's necessary at the time for the thing that you're trying to do. That's why I think, like, when you see these pedals, like what's the Universal Audio things that are out now? Is it 2 varieties of Fender and 1 of Vox that they do?
What do they pedals do? Yeah, there's a Fender Tweed, there's a Fender Deluxe, and there's an AC30.
Yeah, okay. So it's the same sort of deal. Like they don't have their Marshall thing in there, like presumably yet, but I'm sure it will come. But that's your flavor of tones, really. It's not that much more complicated. You look at like a Fender Deluxe, it does cover so much ground outside of your high gain, world, right? You can use it with your Strymon reverbs and stuff and run shit in stereo. You can use it for your like slightly driven, more crunchier tones. It's like wicked sound. You can just use it for anything.
I feel like having 2 amps at a minimum, if you want to record, or even if you just want to like have a point of difference, is probably. You could definitely do 1 amp, but I feel like having 2 amps that are different, sort of like, you know, Fender, Vox, Marshall, choose any 2.
Yeah,
that feels like a pretty good cover all the bases kind of thing. Because if you're recording them, you can blend them and get different things.
I think the difference now is like obviously talk about it all the time, and you know this, but I've got a lot of amps, and I've got some really cool high gain amps, and I'm just not a pedal person. I'm not really that interested in buying the latest JHS like clone pedal, even though that's cool and I love that guy's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But it's not a thing that I've ever really resonated with. Is like a rat distortion pedal or a big muff or something like that. But I'll say like, you know, JHS or a lot of these other pedal companies, like you can get your amp in a box style pedals that work in front of a Fender amp or work in front of a Vox and do sound really good these days. So there's like other ways of getting those flavors that isn't just having like a stack of amps. It's not, I think like my approach to using those pedals is like, okay, not my approach. I don't really understand how they are supposed to work in terms of gain structure and everything. So I always feel a bit like, am I doing this right? Because you've got like, you know, the tone stack of the pedal and then the tone stack of the amp, and like trying to match things up. It feels like a bit of a potential minefield conceptually for me. Whereas
you could argue that that's part of the fun as well, where it's like, oh, hey, you know, if you have 2 amps and 3 pedals, you've got a lot of different combinations happening there.
Again, in terms of your stock, like your toolkit, yeah, having, as you say, 2 of those 3 amps is probably a pretty good start. You know?
Yeah. So, and again, you could easily argue with someone, it's like, hey, if you're just playing at home, a Boss Katana is going to be an awesome choice.
They are so good, man, those amps.
You can scale it. It's not going to, you don't need to have it up super loud to sound good. You've got built-in effects. You've got like everything you need to just play a bit of guitar.
I will say from personal experience, I don't like recording them, but I like sitting and hearing them. I think they're really versatile and very, very cool amps. I haven't quite worked out how to mic them and get them to be as effective sounding, but not everything's about recording, you know? You could gig with one of those amps easily.
A side question to that maybe that we'll get to is, if you're running a studio, you know, it's a different question to how many amps do you need. But if you're running a studio and you don't have any guitar amps and people are coming in to record, are they even going to take you seriously? Like if you're just like, oh, we just do everything through a Helix or an Axe-FX, does that feel... I don't know. Does that feel right?
I think there's plenty of places around that don't have like robust collections of instruments. And I mean, an amp is an instrument. It's in that same category, right?
Yeah, right.
A studio itself will have a decent microphone collection. And to be honest, in terms of like gear for gear's sake, like you just need a decent mic collection. You don't need a bunch of excessive outboard preamps and compressors and stuff. You know, decent mics, decent monitors, decent computer to run your Pro Tool or your DAW, whatever it is that you're working on. That's your kind of your minimum. I think a lot of recording people are musicians in some situations, so that's maybe guitar players or drummers. And I think just along the way you end up collecting stuff that's where it starts. But like I think of studios that I've worked in the past, they haven't all had a particularly robust collection of guitars and amps, but from that approach, you really have to just make sure that whoever you're working with has that stuff to begin with, which sometimes it actually isn't a problem. If you've got a person coming in who has a sound that has been refined over a really long period of time, like okay, take your Thai tables, right?
Okay. Excellent example.
Yeah. He had a sound. He and Doug worked out how to work together with their particular equipment. And if you go into this, you know, obviously it would be great. I'm talking old school King's X, not talking new school King's X. But it's about trying to capture that thing with that Strat and that Lab Series amp and da-da-da. So, yeah, you don't really need to have a million things to get that done. You just need to be able to capture it in the best way. That's what I'd say. Having a decent microphone collection to capture that is one thing. This is, from a recording perspective, that's where you cross the line of, are you crafting something or are you trying to capture something? It can be a very different approach. I think I'm usually trying to...
Very good point.
Yeah, I'm usually trying to craft something, to be honest, which... not to be disrespectful to the people that come in to work with me, but I feel like sometimes, well, most of the time, maybe you're the exception. Oh, well, I was going to say you're the exception, but not really, because you and I just love sitting and playing with gear till we find something that we really like. And I think that's the case with a lot of people. It's just, if you are playing in like a rock band and you just like rock distortion, there's just so many different ways of getting that. And most people are kind of cool about, well, let's try this pedal, let's try that amp, let's try that guitar. It just becomes a bit of a journey to get to an endpoint, and it's fun and it's part of the process. In terms of like having a studio that just had, say, a Helix in it or a Fractal or whatever, it's a funny proposition because you can get anything you want, but because it's almost so easy, it takes some of the fun out of it. From a again, like pragmatic sense, like, yeah, you've got everything. So why do you need any other gear when you have that piece of equipment? Well, it's like, you're not going to go on the tone journey to when you've got it. And yeah, people are coming and giving you money. They kind of they should want to experiment and try and find something unique, not
There's
just
there's a little bit of Disneyland about it, where it's, you suspend belief,
yeah,
or you suspend your adherence to pragmatism, so that you can maybe create something that's, once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, we had this bunch of stuff set up, we captured it. Well, first we crafted the sound, then we captured it, and that ended up influencing the direction the recording took. Otherwise, you end up in that zone where you never finish anything, because you're like, oh, I could have this sound, or I could have this, or I could do that.
Yeah.
Option paralysis. So yeah, it's yeah, there's probably, for running a studio to just being a guitar player at home, there's definitely that difference there. I teach a bunch of people who just have a Boss Katana and they love it.
Yep.
They love it for the fact they don't have to think about anything else, because playing guitar for them is not their job. And that's the point. They just come and sit down. They want to just crank up some gain and delay and have a good time. By the same token, I think, having a Fractal or having a Helix, if you don't have the space or you don't have the budget to have a bunch of nice amps, it's pretty much actually the best solution at the moment. Because
absolutely.
Or an Iridium, like that kind of, you have all the main food groups. For me, I would love an Iridium style thing with the Fractal sounds in it, where it was like, hey, give me like the Band Commander Clean model, give me the Cameron CCV, and give me like one of the Boogie Mark IV models in there. That's my minimal palette of things. I often think as well with guitar amps as an instrument and sounds, there's certain sort of like frequency zones that some amps hit that others don't. Like Marshalls have that upper mid-range sizzle and the bark.
Yep.
You can't whether it's whether it's parts of the circuit, or whether it's like, you always see like things like the cathode follower be talked about in a Marshall, as like that's part of that sound. Whereas a Boogie like literally doesn't have that component in there, so you can't.
I mean, this is the thing to just like bring up the pet.
I'm really digging deep now, but to me, there's or like negative feedback being in the circuit or not is another thing. There's these kind of critical elements.
I was going to say, like, that sort of brings up, like, to go back to pedals and to be like amp in the box pedals. And admittedly, I haven't tried a bunch of them, so I'll just kind of say, I won't say anything too positive or negative, but like, I don't understand how, when you're talking about negative feedback and the cathode followers and all this sort of stuff, like, it's so integral to the sound. How do you possibly go about capturing that in a pedal that is supposed to work with like infinite amount of amps as well? It's like, that to me, it feels like more of a caricature of an amp than it is a representation. And that's sort of say it's not useful in certain contexts, but it's like, I can't get my head around how it's supposed to work, how it's supposed to integrate fully. So,
yeah, it's kind of like that. It gets rolled out anytime anyone talks about rectifiers. They're like, well, they just copied the Soldano circuit. It's like the preamp they did, but the power section is totally different.
Like, have you heard of Soldano when I said recto?
Anyone who thinks a Soldano sounds like a multi-watt rectifier, needs to go and actually listen to those things, because the character is pretty different. So having that's I guess one nice thing about most modelers nowadays, even like your Mua and NuX stuff, they're going to have these things in there where it's like, a Recto and a Mark Series and a few different Fenders and a few different Marshalls. And
I mean, it's that, that classic, it's the flavor palette of tone, like we're talking about. Like we've effectively boil it down to your Fender Vox Marshalls, but really there's like 10 that's in every modeler now. Like that's what, if you want to talk about what you need, if you want to have complete versatility, then that's kind of it. Like, pull up what's in those things. Like, you've got your, as you say, your Recto thing, you've got your Soldano thing, you've got your Friedman thing, you've got your Dumble thing. It's there's kind of like everything is just inspired by those tones, really.
Yeah, and I would almost say, if you can afford, like, if you're approaching guitar from the idea that you're like a stylist and you want to kind of have your sound, and you're building sort of your identity on the instrument, I would almost say, like, in that case, then finding an amp or a style of amp that you like the character of is actually pretty important. It becomes an extension of the instrument, whether it's in a modeler or whether it's in, a real world thing. I mean, if you think of John Petrucci, like so much of the way he sounds is tied to what a Boogie Mark series does. It's really, really, really integral. Some of my favorite Dream Theater sounds are on Train of Thought, where he was using a recto, but most of the time it's like, it's a Mark series thing. He's like, it's so, the two are so bonded there. Or if I think of someone like Doug Aldrich or someone like that, like his sound relies, it's that interaction between the way he plays and also like a modded Marshall that has that like Jose style stickiness to it. Or if you think of, all the music that's been made with like Vox amplifiers with a bunch of like pedals in front of them, or the Fender Deluxe as a utility thing, or even a Fender Hot Rod plus pedals is like, it's got a bit of an identity about it.
Yeah.
It'd almost be like, hey, find that thing where you feel like it's you, but then have a modeler or have a Tone X software thing or something like that, where you can have those other options.
I feel like
flexibility.
That style of player, I know less of them, and I've worked with less of them, and it's not to say they don't exist in this town, certainly not. But those people are there's way more just let's buy lots of shit and try it out.
Exactly.
And it's kind of a shame. It's like there is something to really be said about working within parameters. That's important. Like you're talking about guitars. What's his name? Country guy, Brent Mason. Like he's got that one telly with the 3 pickups in it, which I think is predominantly what he's used for his entire career. No, I mean he's got a few other things as I understand, but like that and a couple of amps. You can be that person that understands your instrument so well and the few amps that you have and make anything happen. Or Brian May, far out. Like there's another great example of guy with one guitar and a treble booster and a Vox, and being able to really understand how to make it work for you and to have your own sort of sound. Like that is kind of cool. Like not kind of cool, it's very cool. You and I, and maybe it's just the secondhand market and and the fact that there's so much stuff being released every year. I mean, we talked about the Mark 7 last week. There's just so
Troy,
much...
at the end of the day, I guess I want it all.
Yeah. But yeah, man, like I don't know. I think like if we were to have been talking about this like 40 years ago, maybe it was a different story. And the fact that you really just have to work with your like, here's my Marshall and I need more gain on it. So how do I do that? And here's my Van Halen album, of which I don't have a tab book for, so I have to listen to how to play all the songs. It's just the level of creativity is, I guess, different. Maybe creativity is the wrong thing to talk about in this situation, but yeah, it's just different. These days, like with your current setup in the Fractals, like how often, like you've got a tone that you gig with. Does that change very often, or is
no, not really. I kind of found that it's like, even when we did the first Ragdoll recording we did together, which was here today. I was gigging a Marshall DSL at the time, and a lot of those tracks were DSL, but we kind of went to town. There's like, it ended up being very layered. There's like the orange Tiny Terror on there. There's the Vox. There's a bit of Soldano. The next one was like, we used that Jet City amp a lot. It wasn't the sounds we were crafting for the songs and the recording weren't necessarily the sound I was using live to play those songs.
Yep.
And then, I kind of back to zero was like, maybe for both of us, like, oh, rectos are a thing. And when you tune down and boost them, you get this very particular kind of sound. So it was like recto +1. And I mean, I did for a while gig. I was like using the recto and a DSL and 2 cabs. And, that didn't last very long. That was a lot of gear to be hauling around. It sounded cool. There were definitely a few gigs where I was like, wow, this is amazing on stage. But then I just kind of went, well, I'll just get an Axe FX and I'll have everything in one box. And I think when I had an Axe Ultra, I just used like the recto model. And then when I got an AX8, I used the recto for a bit. I think I did for a while, it was like the Atomica. So like dialed in to sound like a DSL. And then it's sort of like I stumbled across the Mark series thing, which I don't know, gave me the best of like both worlds. It was like lots of gain, lots of definition, but you know, and we haven't even talked about speakers here, but it's like, you know, once you filter everything through kind of the same speaker cab or IR, that's taking care of a lot of the extra character on there. So,
So you basically found like what it is that it is to you, and that's pretty much now what you've been using for the last little while, or because
yeah, basically,
like obviously you're doing so many videos every week with the Fractal and with other bits of gear. It's like surely you're learning stuff and you're trying stuff out, but it's kind of nice to also know like, yeah, you can do that with this gear, but if you find something you like, you stick with it. Like
it's nice to just plug in at a gig, you know, and then just plug it in and do it and not think about it, or actually there's something to be said about, I know it's going to sound fine. I know I just have to play the songs now and I'll be good.
Yep. I was going to say, like, I find with the digital stuff that I use, I mentioned the other week, but like my AX8, I had a Friedman patch that I dialed in as like the second tone that I made, and I gigged with that exclusively for like 2 years, and there was no clean on that as well. It was just like a patch that was dirty, and I rolled the volume back when I wanted it to be clean, and I had, I think, a solo boost with delay on it for when I needed to do a solo, obviously, and that was pretty much it. And then 4 years ago, I dialed in an 800 patch that I really liked the sound of, and then that was what I used on that, and it hasn't changed very much. And then it's like every time I went to try a different amp, it didn't really give me the thing that I wanted. And which is kind of funny. It's like I'd go back to the other sound. It's like, well, here it is. Like this is me. This is what like I like. And the funny thing is, like with my HX Stomp, I feel like I tweak that a lot more for various reasons. I feel like there's just this, you know, there's this 3K thing or 5K thing or 4K thing in every 3K. I think it is in almost every modeler. It actually exists outside of modeling as well, and I don't know exactly what causes it, but it's like the bane of my existence. Maybe I've got some tinnitus as well around that area that just resonates whenever I hear it, but I don't know if that's how that works.
Extra spicy ears.
Yeah, but like I find like I tweak that stuff maybe a little bit more, but I still end up just kind of coming back to the same place every time. It's funny where with amps I get a lot more like my Rector, my Splawn, like I probably, especially in the last few weeks, I'll fire them up, spend like 20 minutes. I'm going to try this now. And it's a bit more fun. It's a bit more interactive. And I'm just exploring. I guess that's the parameters I'm working within, is like, I've got the bass, treble, EQ and gain on an amp. And I want to work out what's actually possible with this, instead of being like, I don't like the sound of this, I'm going to go to a different patch on a digital thing. It's funny. Like I'm way more willing to tweak the amps more than I am the digital stuff, like, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's interesting, even though one is inherently more tweakable.
Yeah.
I find for me as well, it's, you know, having the kind of context of a band with like, here's the songs, here's the sounds you need.
Yep.
It is kind of nice just having that consistency where you're like, cool. The only thing that's going to change is like the venue. Yep. So, you know, you go and play in this particular room, sort it out at front of house. You're going to play in this other room, sort it out at front of house. So I do really enjoy the consistency there of a 5-minute setup and having all my sounds in there.
Yep.
I think it's another thing as well, you know, for me, I try not to be too precious these days with like, oh, but that's my sound.
Yep.
I don't, you know, you get people who are like, oh no, it's like my sound. And like, you can't look at my pedal board. I cover it up because the settings are secret. And that's definitely a bit of a thing.
I don't think that's as much of a thing these days. Maybe it is, but I mean,
I've met a few people recently where it's like, yeah, they've been funny about, oh yeah, I know, I tape up the knobs because, you know, that's my sound, which is, hey, it's you do you. I don't really understand that. I'd much rather be like, hey, yeah, it's whatever thing it is. If you want to go super nerdy about it, I can tell you, but you know,
it's that thing of like,
it's still gonna sound like me when I play it.
That's the exact thing, you know, and it's you hear those stories of like all the guys that played through Eddie Van Halen's amp and they still sounded like themselves, which is like, that's cool. Like if you suck on your gear, you're going to suck on my gear too. If I suck on my gear, I'm going to suck on your, like it's not going to be that different. It's just
exactly.
So, but hey man, whatever gets you out of bed.
I think safely you could say when it comes to amps, it's like amp plus one, and whether the plus one is another amp or it's a modeler,
Yep.
that's a pretty. I think it's an important part of the craft of being a guitar player is like understanding how an amp works. And I kind of like the aesthetic of, you see some players like, you see Phil X, and he's got that old Marshall where he's replaced the front with like a barbecue grill.
Yep.
That's his amp.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone I really like on YouTube, and apologies for butchering the name, I think it's Uge Valaverta. He's Scandinavian. He's like the Scandinavian Zach Wild. He's like the big brother I never had. Does the way he does amp demos is so cool because he has this old 800 that he calls the bad boy. And it sounds sick. Like this dude just like, he plays like an ESP with some EMGs and an SD1 bad boy 800. It's just sick. It's just such a tone, and it's like, but he'll like demo. I was watching a demo where he did a demo of a new 800 and then a Silver Jubilee, and he's just like sweeping through the settings, and he's like, yeah, listen to the bass, like it's more like than he's like, it's got a wider cue, and so he knows what's going on, but he's just sitting there like going John, chugging away and like sweeping the bass control, and being like, yeah, see, that's different. But then he goes, anyway, 800 best amp ever, and then plays, and like it just sounds that like 10% more awesome, I think, because he's enjoying it so much. He's actually, I think he's got the KHE amp switcher thing as well.
Another legend.
But it's so awesome, a dude who like knows his sound, knows the thing. It's like, this amp, just give me a 2203. I'd prefer to have my 2203. I'd prefer to have the bad boy because it's my amp. But, he's basically like, any 2203, I can get my sound on it. He's like, I can get my sound on a bunch of other stuff, but this is just that 5% more awesome. So
I said to you before, like, I think 800s are the thing that I find I'm the most comfortable with as well. Like, at least playing dirty. I don't own one, and I really want one to have in the collection. And bloody old mate Head First, Jason Tong, had one for sale like 2 days ago.
I saw that,
and I was like, and it was priced really well. And he's like, oh, I'll sell it to you for this, or I can mod it too. I'm like, but now's not the time for me to buy another amp, unfortunately. Maybe in a few months' time.
Yeah, but, I think as well for me, it's I have a Mark IV here, which is an amazing amp. Got the Synergy rig, got a bunch of stuff. Got my old Soldano Deluxe Reverb. It's still, I don't know. I have a sentimental thing with Marshalls where if you only own one amp, then you have to look at that amp all the time. So there's something that looks right about a Marshall growing up with them. So yeah, I mean, when I did the Zen Amps thing last year, it was literally, we played this, like they've got an early 70s Plexi.
Yep.
I plugged that in and it was like everything else was trying to be that amp.
Yep.
It's like that amp was the original. That amp was the James Dean, and everything else was just some variation of a Fonzie.
Have you played many other, have you played any late 60s Marshalls?
Not really, no.
Man, I'd love
I played, I'm trying to remember what year it was from. I remember Graham had like an old Hiwatt.
Oh, yeah.
That he'd rebuilt, and that was stunning. Like, that was the loudest amp I've ever played. It was ridiculous. But yeah, never like the late 60s Marshall thing. I think this one was like a 71. Yep. So angry sounding, just so much gain.
Yeah. Like,
you don't think of Plexis as being like a high gain thing, but there was so much gain, man. It was just like, it just had it.
Yeah. Well, man, I love my J&P. I think it's a really great sound, but I just would love to try a proper Plexi and see how I go with it. Like, I would like to try the Sir 68. Was it SL68? I think that'd be a cool thing to hear,
They're so good. Simon Hosford, who did the Ingve thing at the guitar show, was playing one, and yeah, that thing sounded ridiculous.
Yeah. But so yeah, in terms of, I'm just trying to looking at my my amps right now in terms of to answer the question of what's my you asked what my guitar would be if the house is burning down, which one am I going to grab, which amp am I going to get? I actually don't know, because they all serve such different purposes. It's I don't know if I would say the Marshall, to be honest. Do you know what I would actually say? which is crazy of all the amps, but I think my Stiletto is one of my most versatile amps. My Mesa Boogie
Yeah,
Stiletto.
very underrated boogie.
The amount of times that I've had a recording session and I've gone through, half a dozen amps or something to show the guitar player what we could try. And it's like I switched to the Stiletto and it's the one that everyone likes. And I like it as well. And it's martially, but it's got a difference. It's like a slightly different gain character to it. The clean on it's pretty good. Because like the DSL is a really cool amp too. We've used that a lot, and I've got a 50 watt downstairs at the moment. But yeah, I think the Stiletto to me is maybe a little bit more my speed. I think it's and I don't want to cop out and say the Synergy stuff because that's a bit sort of can do anything with that. But my AC30 head's really cool, but I'd probably go the Stiletto. I can do a lot with that.
That's cool. Yeah, I'd probably it'd be a toss up between like the Mark IV and a DSL. I find mate.
How do you find the cleans on your Recto? Did you use it much?
They're okay. Yeah, they're definitely better than like I haven't spent a lot of time dialing it in. And this is the thing, right? The other thing is like speaker choice is super important. So if you were going to have, here's a question: many guitars, one amp, one guitar, many amps. Or say two guitar, many amp.
Many guitars, one amp.
Yeah, right.
I think.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think I could, if I had the option of, okay, those three, the Strat Telly Les Paul plus like a Silvertone and a Duesenberg and all these sort of things, I think that would be more, I could take those plus my Stiletto rather than being like, all right, here's my Telly through a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier and I think that would be the way to go for me.
Interesting.
I think if I owned a Mark series, I think I might, and I spent more time on it. I think the versatility of that covers so much ground that it probably would be up there as being like the one amp to choose. But
yeah, exactly.
For me, the moment the Stiletto, I think that covers a lot of bases. I think I do really like EL34s.
Oh yeah, big time, big time. So that's interesting. Yeah, it's almost like I've got the guitars like an acoustic Strat Telly Les Paul style and something just out of the box. So if you had a stable of 5 guitars and again amp plus one, whether it's a modeler or whether it's another amp, that's pretty. Yep. That's a pretty comprehensive, for something so-called minimal. It's certainly achievable for most people living in the developed world, so to speak.
Look,
if that's an appropriate term.
It's doable if you firstly aren't worried about buying new gear. Like that's the only reason I've got stuff is because like very rarely do I spend a cent on anything from the shops. Because the secondhand market is so like at least over here in Perth, you can get anything for like a decent price, amps and guitars and the whole thing. And if you wait long enough, and you can get some really, really good deals. So yeah, it's achievable. And as long as you also don't be like, I'm going to go buy like 5 guitars right now at Sweetwater or look up on Gumtree or whatever it is, like Facebook, and just go buy them. Like all this stuff takes time to collect. I'd never thought when I was like 16, 17, I never thought I would have this much stuff. Even in 2010, like actually, do you know what it was? When you and I started hanging out again around like 2010, do you remember when I built my Warmoth Strat?
I certainly do. And
I think I messaged you about it because I was keen to put a guitar together, which it's a Strat with a reverse headstock. It's a Swamp Ash body with a Koa top on it because I wanted
It's Reb Nuno, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. A reverse 70s style headstock. So it's a bit of Nuno on there, bit of Yngwie with the 70s style headstock. Sorry, Yngwie. And then the Red Beach Koa top. So it's all those sort of things. But I think that was the point when I started to buy gear. And I had stuff before that, but it had taken like a long time to have the guitars that I bought and the amps and all that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, here's another Ibanez 550. Why didn't I buy that guitar? That's like only a few $100s. And here's a fucking like a P bass, a Squire P bass. Well, I'm playing a bit of bass now. That might be useful to own in case I need to do a gig with it. It was just like I just started buying stuff and flipped some of the stuff, like the cheaper stuff, but I've still got lots of it.
Yep. It's I remember you coming around when you wanted to buy an amp as well and trying out a bunch of different stuff at mine and kind of being like, oh, I think this is it.
Yeah.
Would you buy like a 900 or something?
Yeah, that was the conclusion of that appointment was a mistake because I did. That was
part
like
of the process.
Because what happened is I went from having exclusively rack stuff or being obsessed with rack stuff, so ADA MP1 and all that, which was cool, but didn't really like the power amp on it. I was running through my 4x12 V30 cab and I thought, you know what, fuck this. I just need a head. So I sort of figured I wanted a Marshall and you've got a bunch of them. But I sort of came to the conclusion I didn't really like the 900s that much. But then not long after that, one came up for sale relatively cheap. So it was 50 watt dual reverb, high gain dual reverb. And went and bought that. But I just never really got along with it. It was way too bright, which I sort of discovered later that if it's really loud, it doesn't really matter so much if that is so bright. But I was never playing at levels that allowed for that. So it didn't really cut the mustard for what I liked. And it took a little bit to get rid of that. I think actually I traded that amp for the 550 I just mentioned.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. So that
everything came up Millhouse.
Yeah, it did, because it's a red 550, which is one of the guitars I always wanted. Actually, just quickly on that, I was playing my 570 last week because some of the gear I have is because I was obsessed with pointy guitars and specifically Ibanez guitars when I was really into Paul Gilbert, and that's all I listened to. But man, boy, playing the 570 now, I can't do it. Like it's too thin. It's way too thin. Like I need more.
Too slender.
Yeah,
need more beef.
And like I just don't really play that much. Like I've got these solos and stuff when I gig, but I just don't really like playing them that much. I like playing rhythm guitar, and yeah, those necks don't do it for me. I find it really, really tough. It's one of those things where I'll never sell some of these guitars because they have a lot of sentimental value, and I still think they look so cool. I think a 550 is the perfect looking Super Strat.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And particularly the maple fretboards with a 550. Like that is something real special. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not really that keen on gigging them anymore.
Yeah, I remember buying that Hamer Chaparral that I had, and then I gigged it, and I hated playing it. It was very uncomfortable to play live. Like, I can't gig a Super Strat. I think I came to the conclusion it's not for me. A Strat, totally cool. A Les Paul style guitar, totally cool. Something about like a Super Strat just doesn't work for me.
Well, my Charvel, like when I first got that, because the gigs I do, most of the gigs I do are in D standard. So I mean, the guitar was probably set up for like 9 to 42 in standard tuning. It's like, great, I'm going to tune it down to D. I'll put 11 to 49 on there. That'll help out a little bit, but it really needed a setup. And I played a couple of gigs with it. It just felt really strange. And those, I don't know if you felt it actually, but the neck on them, it's like, it feels quite square.
There's a blockiness about it.
Yeah, and before it was set up, it really felt weird to play. It was like one of the weirdest guitars I've ever played. And then once I was like so close, like seconds away from putting it up for sale because I couldn't stand it. And I thought, I'll just quickly try tweaking this truss rod. I did that like an eighth of a turn, and all of a sudden I was like, this is like way better. The strings came back on to where they should be, like lowered a little bit. Played the guitar, it sounded wicked, gave it to Tim at MT, he sorted it out, and now it's like my main gigging guitar. So
I remember having that moment, taking a guitar to Kalgoorlie to do a gig, and on like the first night, putting new strings on it, and the setup sucked, and I was like, oh crap, what have I done?
Yeah.
And I was like, tweak the truss rod, gave it like, an eighth of a turn, and it just went from unplayable to awesome. So yeah.
Well, my gig
truss rod kids.
Yeah. Well, and some of these guitars, like the Charvel's got the heel truss rod thing. You just need to get a screwdriver and like twist it. It's really easy.
Good.
My gig on Friday night, the second gig I did, I actually wasn't certain if it was an electric gig or an acoustic gig. I thought it was an acoustic gig, and when I showed up, there was a drum kit and a bass rig. So I was like, I just come from a gig where I played electric. I'll just play electric for this one too. Thankfully, because my pedal board is set up for 4-cable method, for duo gigs, for direct, for all this sort of stuff, like with the HX Stomp,
You did your due diligence, mate.
I did. I had thankfully some sounds that covered a few bases, even though I sort of discovered as the gig went on that the patches weren't quite leveled out very well, but it was fine. But this band plays in standard tuning instead of in D.
Right.
So I had to tune the guitar up to standard tuning with 11s on it, which I don't hate that, but I wasn't really prepared for it.
Yeah.
And it was a bit tough. It was, yeah, some of the lead stuff as I started doing it, I was like, man, I haven't worked up to this. Just the slinkiness I think was missing a little bit for me, but it was still fun.
You're not match fit. It's very, very interesting. I mean, I think guitar players, that maximal attitude is very much encouraged by forums and social media and that kind of stuff. But, at the end of the day, it's like being a minimalist doesn't mean having nothing.
Yeah.
It means having just enough to do what you need to do. So I think knowing what you need to do maybe is a more important question to be asking yourself. And from there, you can figure out, if you actually have too much stuff. I feel like every 6 months I have a bit of a cull where I just, I'll sell pedals and, even if it's guitars or stuff like that, it's just like, okay, this hasn't been played for 3 years. This has to go. I bought it thinking I'll use it all the time, and that just didn't end up being. So, it can move on to somebody else's collection where it never gets played, or maybe someone will actually play it.
Yeah, I'm a bit funny with some of the gear that I buy like that. I mean, I sold a couple guitars the end of last year, like, ones that definitely weren't used and I didn't have a lot of sentimentality towards. But sort of all the ones and there's so many of them, but they get used just enough to that, or like my Ibanez guitars, I just am so attached to them. I don't think I can bring myself to get rid of them. But yeah, Strats and Tellies and whatnot, like they all have a place. And I'm sort of also, I don't know, my kids might want to play guitar in the future. And if they've got a hell of a lot of cool stuff they can just grab off the shelf when they want to play, that might be fun for them too.
They can just go nuts.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know what my son was, he's got that little red 3-string guitar. He was having a little play on that this morning, and he's almost getting the action right now. Because I've tried to show him, he's not focused enough to understand how to play it. But, if he's starting to develop an interest and we can sit down, I can show him how to maybe fret the strings. That would be nice. And who knows, he might be a Strat guy or a Telly guy or a Les Paul guy, and it'd be nice for him to have those to choose from.
Yeah. Or, as most things happen, it's like the thing that you don't have, that's what they'll want the most.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have okay, just quickly. So what's missing from your collection at the moment? Because I can tell you some stuff that's missing from mine. I have a lot of bases covered. This is outside of what you need. This is like a...
You've got a 335 now, don't you?
I have a 335. I might actually message him. I'll message Tim at MT Guitars after this because he's had it for a bit, just doing some setup on it. I need to get it back. But because you just did a video, I didn't watch it yet, but you did a video about your 335, hey?
I mentioned in my Q&A, I might actually do a video about it. But yeah, it's late 70s. I think someone figured out in the comments it's probably got T-top pickups. It's got the weird little coil tap on it. It was my dad's guitar, and we did a lot of tracking with it.
It's such a good guitar, man. It's like, I've played, sorry to cut you off, but I've played like 370s, 335s. They all look the same, and they've all been the best guitars. I love them. They're so comfortable. And because I'm big too, like I'm 6'1", I feel comfortable on like a bigger bodied guitar like that.
Yeah. It doesn't look like a ukulele on us.
Yeah. So that's
I mean, it's awesome that you got a 335.
Yeah, I've got one. Mine's 94, I think.
Yeah.
So, but it's a cool guitar, really cool guitar.
I don't know. Do you want to go first and list off some things you don't have?
I don't have a Jazzmaster.
Yep.
That I think is a bit of an oversight on my behalf because there's a few times, it's sort of become, I think in the last 10 years, a bit of a required sound or required knowledge of how to get I don't even know what it is. Jangliness is maybe the wrong word, but because they are really versatile guitars. They're not toneless because to me, a Les Paul and a Telly and a Strat have very specific identifiable features, and I don't really know what that is with the Jazzmaster, but I think it's something that I'd like to have. But yeah, I I don't have enough need to go spend 2-3 grand on one. It would have to be like a Mexican or a Japanese that comes up at a decent price that I might.
The Squire Classic vibes are very cool for that kind of thing.
Yep. But so I'm missing that. I don't have an SG, but I also don't really like SGs that much. I don't mind your one. Your one's pretty cool. Yours sounds really good. Your 70s one, 3 pickup. But yeah, they don't really sort of feel that comfortable when I play them. And what else am I missing? So I don't own it, but there's a Duesenberg at the studio, so it gives you that sort of Gretschy thing. And it's got a Bigsby on it, and that's a really cool guitar. But yeah, probably the SG and the Jazzmaster. Those are the main glaring mistakes. Oh, and I don't have a 12-string, like electric or acoustic, which is a shame because I would love to have both, and I have had situations where both would have been really useful. But it's just on the list. Because the thing is, like, I don't like guitars that I want to have for the studio. They can't be just cheap shit things because, intonations are not going to be good, and the hardware is going to be bad, and it's going to might be bad, and I don't want to risk that if I'm pulling.
Yeah, you actually want to be able to record it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like custom shop anything, but it has to be of a good enough quality that it will be stable and reliable. And that's where the thing is. If I just want to have a shitload of like Squire guitars or whatever, they may work for 3 minutes and then fall apart in my hands. Maybe they'll be fine, and I'm exaggerating, but I try not to buy really cheap, shitty guitars. But yeah,
I think.
What about you?
I think for me, there's a guitar with a Floyd that I actually set up. So maybe I should just like set up the Floyd on one of my guitars. But I would probably say, the offset kind of thing would be one. Another that came to mind would be, I'd love a DGT, but that's definitely a want, not a need, just to kind of round out the PRS collection. One thing, I got that Harley Benton Bass 6. It kind of made me think that it'd be cool to have like a really nice baritone or something like that, where you can tune it B to B or A to A or anything like that.
Yep. I'd like to have that. I actually don't have a 7-string either.
Yeah, that's a bit of a thing. I bought that JP7 because I was like, hey, I think I need a 7-string, and now I use it for acoustic gigs. So, hey, at least it gets played every week.
I think at the session I did a few weeks ago, I had a moment of like, oh man, I just wish I had a 7 just to play one chord.
Yeah.
But that's what it is for me, because I don't really need to play 7s or 8s or anything for other music. So it's like, it's just that one chord or 2 chords just to give like a little emphasis in the final chorus or a bridge or something. And I'm like, for the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars it would cost to buy something just for that task, I just don't want to do it. But
just for that one chord once every 2 years.
Like I've cheated by just tuning the low string or 2 strings down a bunch, and you can get away with that.
And,
but
like that Phil X Guitar Hacks thing he did during the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
Like, you want a bouzouki sound? Move the string into the other nut place.
That was one of the most creative things I've ever heard. Like, I never would have occurred to me to do that, and it sounds so cool.
Really, I don't need any stuff. I just need the excuse to come up with dumb things like that. Or, I remember doing something with a what was it? I wanted to like play this. I was trying to play. I was watching a video on like guitars with microtonal frets.
Oh yeah.
So I was like, what I could do is I could just tune one string to a quarter tone and then use a capo on just that one string, and it kind of worked, which was fun. You get some different sounds in there. So and then other instruments becomes a whole other thing, and it'd be great to go full tea party and have a suite of instruments from the Middle East or North Africa or something like that. But then it's just the issue begins again. So,
well, mate, I've got a great mandolin that was sold to me a couple of years ago.
Yeah, upsold by a certain member of my family.
Yeah, let me tell this story really quick because it is quite funny. Because we were recording, was it Back to Zero?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and Leon's dad, Bill, he comes up to me and he says, "Mr. Todd," and he calls me Mr. Todd because my granddad's name was Bill Todd, like Leon's dad, whose name is Bill Todd. He calls me Mr. Todd. He says, "Mr. Todd, I've got this mandolin. It came in, it wasn't working, and it was all broken and all this sort of stuff, and I fixed it up. and you want it? And I said, oh, yeah. And I thought he was going to give me the mandolin, but you want it? And I said, okay. You know, he said, all right, well, $160. I thought, oh, okay. And he said, I tell you what we'll do. Every time I see you, you just give me $10. You just put $10 in my pocket, and then you can.
For anyone who needs a reference point, Kramer. Just imagine this is happening.
Yeah, Kramer.
And Kramer is selling you the guitar.
Somewhere between Kramer and Steve Vai is what Leon's dad looks like. And so that's what I did. I gave him $10 for like the subsequent 16 times I went up to the house, and got this mandolin, which is fucked. Like, let's be honest, it doesn't work. You can't really play it. It's like, I don't know what he fixed on it, but he certainly didn't make it any better than what it probably came to him as. And it sits in the case. And do you know what's really annoying? It's really hard to store that case. I don't have anywhere to put it. So,
you know what you need to do is just take it in for a warranty repair, mate.
You know what he did? He gave me the old Netflix Disney Plus treatment, like just $10, just $10 when I see it.
You've got a mandolin subscription.
Yeah. I think it's made it on one recording one time. For probably like a single note line or something like that, because I was able to keep it in tune for that long. But yeah, he got me. He really got me.
Hilarious. And maybe on that note, we will leave it at this discussion. We'd love to hear from all of our listeners. We have an Instagram page now where they can come and follow us and submit questions either in the comments or via DM.
You can find us on the Gear. It's called The Gear Podcast, like the name of the show, and you'll see the thumbnail from the podcast on the Instagram page. So yeah, come and say hello, and I set it up literally as I was jumping on for this this call. So yeah, we need some followers. Oh, actually, should I check it live? We'll see if anyone else has discovered the page.
Let's see how many followers we've got over the last hour and a bit.
Doesn't look like there's very many, but that's okay.
That's okay.
It starts with one thing. I don't know
why. Doesn't even matter how hard I try. All the Linkin Park fans can finish that one off. I'm Leon. You're Troy. We'll see you for the next episode next week. Take it easy.
Peace.